This is J. Krishnamurti's second public talk in San Francisco, California, 1975.
I would like, if I may, repeat again what we said the other day when we met here. This is not an one-sided affair. You and I and the speaker are... Is that better? It's not better? Is it any better now? Bravo. We are sharing the thing together. You're not just merely gathering some ideas from the speaker, some conclusions, or some philosophical concepts. We are dealing with what is actually going on outside, and also what's going on within ourselves. What actually is going on, not what we like to think what is going on. And so, if I may repeat again, we are sharing the thing together. And so it is your responsibility also to work, to listen, to find out what the speaker is saying without agreement or disagreement, but closely examine together what is, and if it is possible to transform, to go beyond what is. As we were saying the other day, when we last met here, that knowledge conditions the mind. And through knowledge, we look at all the phenomena of the world, both outward and inward. Knowledge is the accumulation of experience, and from that arises memory, and the response of memory is thought. So thought is a material process, and this knowledge that one has accumulated through centuries, ever since man has began, that knowledge, however good, however necessary, and so on, that knowledge shapes our minds, our hearts, our activities. And as long as we live within that field of knowledge, knowledge is always in the past, there is no freedom. Freedom from the known. And as we're going to talk about several things like fear, pleasure, relationship, love, We are going to examine all this together and see for ourselves directly their significance, their structure, and their nature. Then perhaps, if you are serious, if one goes into it very, very deeply, not urged by circumstances, by some influence, but going to ourselves, look at it, then there might be a total psychological transformation, psychological revolution, which is so essential to bring about a different culture, a different society. That's the whole meaning of this morning's investigation. That the society, the culture in which we live, has conditioned our minds, our hearts, our activities, our daily life in relationship. And that society, that culture, is created by each one of us, by our parents, forefathers, by the ancient people, and so on. That society, with all its economic, social problems, has shaped our minds. And that shaping, that conditioning, is essentially through knowledge, through constant repetition. Like a computer. You program it, and what you tell it, it will respond instantly. And our brains have been conditioned for millennia and whether it is at all possible to uncondition that mind so that there is a psychological revolution so that we can live on this earth happily, intelligently, with compassion, without any sense of violence, conflict. That is the problem that faces most of us who are at all deeply concerned with what is going on in the world. The violence, the starvation, the wars, the national divisions, religious separations, and so on. So we must inquire, if you will, and we share together, what is the place of knowledge? If it conditions, as it does, the human mind, I mean by that word mind, the intellect, which is the capacity to reason logically, sanely, and the mind includes the heart, the emotions, the totality of the human entity. At least we are using that word mind in that sense, the totality of human activity, human responses, feelings, the various thoughts, desires, purposes, conclusions, the incessant suffering, all that is the mind. And that mind has been conditioned. And we are asking whether it is at all possible to uncondition the mind, because a conditioned mind is not free mind. It's a mechanical mind. It's a repetitive mind. And when faced with a totally different kind of challenge, it responds according to its old knowledge, and therefore its response is not adequate. And hence, the inadequacy brings about conflict. I hope you are following each other. Our question is, what place has knowledge? And what is the relationship of knowledge to the transformation of man, psychological man, and therefore the outward man? Really, there is no, to go into it very deeply, there is no outer and inner. There is only this constant movement of thought and its activity, which expresses itself outwardly and inwardly. And what place has thought in the transformation of man? What place has thought in bringing about a totally different quality of mind, and therefore heart, therefore that sense of compassion? What place has thought in all that? Thought being the response of memory, experience, and knowledge. And knowledge, as we said, is essentially the past. I think this is fairly obvious, so we needn't labor the point. So, what place has knowledge, and therefore thought, in bringing about a radical revolution psychologically, and therefore society? Has it a place at all or no place? And therefore we must examine again together, share together, journey together. It isn't that the speaker is just talking to himself. We are sharing this very, very serious thing together. And therefore, it's neither agreeing nor disagreeing, like two friends talking over together their problems. And therefore, there is no authority. The speaker is not a Delphic oracle, but two affectionate, friendly, companionable people talking over their many problems and being friends. They are aware of each other. They are aware of their prejudices, their shortcomings, their impulses, their desires, their pettiness and their malice and arrogance. But yet, in spite of all that, took over, not only casually, hesitantly, but also seriously, the problems that is in their heart, in their minds. So what is thought? What is this process of thinking upon which all our civilization, all our culture, religion, activity is based on? Thought has produced this world, both outwardly and inwardly. And again, that's a fact. That is what is going on actually. Can thought transform man? And man has to change radically. The change is not according to a certain pattern or according to certain ideals, certain conclusions, philosophies. Because those philosophies, conclusions, ideals are the product of thought. Thought has put together the skeleton of what is called religion, with their saviors, with their masters, with their heaven and hell. And as one observes, both historically and actually what's going on, thought has bred all this. And yet we think through thought, thinking rationally, quietly, deeply, that thought can somehow, through some mysterious process, change our minds and our hearts. And we are saying, the speaker is saying, that thought cannot possibly transform man, however subtle, however erudite, however cunning, however insane it is. Thought has no possibility whatsoever in bringing about a psychological revolution which is so absolutely necessary. So then, what place has knowledge? If thought cannot bring about a change of great depth, of great beauty, of compassion, which are necessary in this world, both as a human being and the collective, then what place has thought? You understand my question? Please, at the end of the talk, if you will ask questions, but now is not the moment. the Western civilization sprang from the Greeks, who maintained that measurement is essential, and measurement is thought. And the ancient Greeks, with their philosophies, exploded over Europe. That's a fact. They said rational, clear thinking based on knowledge and measurement is necessary. And if you observe all our technological knowledge and activity, everything in the West is based on thought, both its religions, its national divisions, its economic status, and so on. And India, ancient India, not modern India, which is as corrupt and rotten as here, ancient India said, and then again very few, that measurement is illusion. To find the immeasurable, and that is the search of man, that is the everlasting inquiry of man, thought must be suppressed. Thought must be controlled in order to go beyond the illusory structure of thought, to find or to come upon that which is not measurable, the eternal, the infinite. But they too, the ancient Indians, use thought. Though they try to suppress thought, this very suppression is the process of thought. So both the West and the East are in the same position. The one trying to solve the human problem in terms of thought. And we are saying, please listen to it if you will, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, but seeing actually the fact of what is, the thought in no way can change man. Thought has its place in the technological world, in the world of action, in the world of skill, in the world of everyday activity. If one wants to learn cycling, you have to learn, memorize, learn balance, and so on. Knowledge has its place, but it cannot bring about a psychological revolution in man. Then what will? You understand the problem? So to find out what will, one must go into this question of fear. You understand what we're saying? that thought has its place, knowledge has its place, but knowledge, thought, through centuries, though it has tried to transform itself, has not done so. And so, thought, whatever it will do, however much it may control discipline itself, however much it may run after these gurus, saviors, and all the rest of it, is not capable, utterly irrelevant in the transformation of man. And if thought cannot, what will? What is the energy? Not some mysterious energy, not some energy to be awakened through a series of mechanical practices and so on and on. But what is that energy that will change man? And to find that energy, to go into it, we must first find out whether the mind can be free from fear. Because fear, in all its forms, limits energy, confines it, darkens it. And our life, a great portion of our life, unfortunately, is based on fear. Fear of poverty, fear of not achieving what we want, success. And in this country, success is worshipped as a god. Fear of physical pain, fear of old age, fear of death, fear of what somebody says about you. You know, the innumerable fears that the mind has collected, both conscious as well as unconscious. And we are asking that fear, whether it be casual, superficial, or deeply rooted, whether that fear can be completely set aside, can mind can be totally free from it. Don't say it can never be free. If you say it can never be free, then you are blocking yourself. Or if you say, yes, it can be free, then we've already come to a conclusion. But if you begin to inquire, to find out whether the mind, so deeply entrenched in fear, whether it's at all possible for it to be free. Not at different levels of consciousness, but completely. Now, how do you inquire into it? Please bear in mind, this is not a group therapy, which I have a horror of, nor a collective inquiry. You are inquiring your personal problem. It's your issue. You have dozen fears of which you may be conscious or unconscious. And you know very well what it does, both in relationship with another, fear of the past, fear of physical pain, fear of old age and death and disease. And if you are aware, as you are sitting there, if you are aware, that is, if you are conscious of one fear, at least one, by inquiring into that one fear, that inquiry will reveal the whole structure of fear. If you are aware, that is, to be aware means to look without distortion, without prejudice, without the desire to go beyond fear. Just to observe. As you observe the sunset, you can't do anything about the sunset or the yesterday's storm. You just observe, look at it, see what it is doing. And to be so choicelessly aware that awareness opens the book of fear, the whole book, not the many chapters or 1 or 2 pages, but the fear from the beginning to the end. That means whether you are capable, as you are sitting there listening, to be aware, not go to school or college or go to somebody to learn how to be aware. It's like those people who are learning to be sensitive, which is absurd. One is afraid of a physical pain that one has had last week, and one hopes it will not recur again. And in that there is fear. One is afraid of death, that everlasting thing that is waiting for all of us. One is afraid of one's wife or husband or girl or boy. There are so many fears. And if you invite one as you are sitting there, what is the cause of fear? We are going to say something perhaps you've not quite gone into. If you have, please forgive the repetition of it. What is the cause of fear? The deep roots of fear and also the casual fears. If you have gone into it, as we are doing it now, you have to find out, not from the speaker, As we said yesterday, the speaker has no authority whatsoever. You have to find this out for yourself. And therefore, examination of this fact together. Together, you understand, you and I examining, not you accepting or denying, and memorizing the words, the ideas, the conclusion. Together we are looking at this enormous thing called fear. What is the root cause of it? Whether it is be the fear of physical pain, fear of losing a job, fear of poverty, if you are rich, if you are well off, fear of, oh, heaven's sake, you know what, the fears that one has. What's the cause of? What is the essence of it? Now, if you are looking for a cause, that's a waste of time. That's a process of analysis. And having discovered the cause, if you can, through analysis, where are you at the end of it? So the investigation into the cause of fear, cause, is not only irrelevant, but wastage of time and energy. But if you ask, what has brought about, not the cause, this abiding, this sense of agony, this sense of loneliness that brings about fear. How has it flowered? If you ask me, and I'm asking for you, the speaker is asking for you, then you will find that it is thought that has brought this about. Thinking. Thinking, as we said, is the product of experience, of memory, experience, knowledge. That's a fact. I think I might lose my job. I had pain last week, and I don't want it today. It might happen, which is again the movement of thought. And nobody can deny this fact, that thought, which is a material process, that thought, conditioned by knowledge, invariably must produce fear of tomorrow, uncertainty. And we are living in a world, in the modern world, where everything is uncertain. And we want certainty, both outwardly and inwardly. And the groping after this certainty, whether religiously or economically or socially and all the rest of it, is the movement of thought. And thought must and does create fear. And one hasn't time to go into it much more deeply, because we have to talk about several other things this morning. And I do not know if you have noticed, how our minds is always pursuing pleasure in different forms. Pleasure of possession, having power, economically, politically, socially, or individually, and so on. Power of others, power that knowledge gives, power of awakening certain capacities, all that. And in the pursuit of all that is pleasure, the sexual pleasure. I do not know if you have not noticed how the mind, thought is always pursuing this. Not only pleasures in domination, but also pleasure in relationship. The pleasure and the delight of seeing a clear mountain against the blue sky, and the delight of that moment is registered in the brain cells as memory, and the repetition of that delight, the demand of that through thought of that delight is pleasure. When you actually see that mountain against the lovely, clear, blue sky, at that instant there is no thought of pleasure, there is only observation, the beauty, the loveliness, the shadows. Then thought comes around, says, I must have it again tomorrow. That's what you do sexually. The repetition, the boredom, the mechanical thing. We're not saying that we must suppress pleasure. That's for the priests. Don't waste your time, sir, clapping or agreeing. Just listen. Because that's what you're caught in. Not only the denial of pleasure, the resistance to certain forms of pleasure, but the intent of pleasure, the direction of pleasure, which again is the product of thought. So thought creates both fear and the pursuit of pleasure. This again is a fact. That is what actually is. And can you observe, be aware of this, of the fear, pleasure, as the product of thought, and not deny it, not suppress it. Therefore, out of that arises the question, what is discipline and control? You understand, I have pleasure in overeating, a pleasure in so many different ways. Pleasure of possession, pleasure of domination, pleasure of power. So, what is discipline and what is control? Has control any place at all? Please listen carefully. We are not advocating no control. That's what anyhow you are doing that anyway. But we are asking, what is the place of discipline and control where pleasure, fear are concerned? Control and discipline, again, is the movement of thought, resistance and acceptance. The word discipline means to learn, comes from the word disciple. The disciple who is learning from the master, from the teacher. Not suppression, conformity, imitation, which now signifies that word, discipline. Discipline means to learn. And the very act of learning has its own discipline. You understand this? If I want to learn Italian, the very learning of it brings about order in the mind. That is so, isn't it? Are you all following each other? Or are we all on a clear, lovely morning wishing somewhere else to be? So discipline means the act of learning from moment to moment. Not gathering knowledge and acting according to that knowledge, which is what is generally understood as being discipline. Right? Can I proceed? Can I go on? I hope you understand all this. If you don't, I'm sorry. Control implies resistance. In that, there is the controller and the controlled. The pleasure of possession, the pleasure of domination, and the power that comes with domination. And you say, I must control that desire, which means resist that desire. Build a wall psychologically against that desire, and so on. Now, is it possible? Please listen carefully. Is it possible not to have any control at all, but to learn all the implications of pleasure, the structure and the nature of fear and pleasure? And when you observe, then you will see that the observer is the observed, and therefore the necessity of control totally disappears. You might say, you as the speaker, do you actually do this? The speaker says yes. He had no control whatsoever in his life. Which doesn't mean he does what he likes. But order is necessary. Oh, Lord, there's so much to talk about. When there is order in yourself, not mechanical order of discipline, control, and imitation and conformity. When there is order in yourself, which means no confusion, but direct perception and action. Then there is order, not artificially brought about, conforming to a blueprint. But this order comes when you understand the whole nature of disorder in which we live. In our lives, there's such disorder. And to understand that disorder, and then you will see out of that disorder comes an order which is absolute, mathematically clear. And such a mind has no need for control or discipline in the sense of suppression, conformity, and so on. And now, there's the next question, problem. Is love pleasure? You understand my question? Is love desire? Is love sex? And that word, unfortunately, love, has been so misused, trodden on, made dirty, both by religions and by modern permissiveness. So we must find out if you're at all serious. Because if you have no love in your heart, you're dead human beings. You may have pleasure, any amount of sex, any amount of possession. Might be the most powerful man in the world with a lot of money. But you're a human being, a mechanical entity, repetitive, inconsistent, contradictory, and in conflict. So you must find out, not accept, not deny, find out for yourself, for God's sake, what love means. That word has been spoiled by religions. Love of God, love of human beings, love of whatever you love. So, we're asking, is love pleasure? And we have made in this modern world, and probably in the Victorian era too, only they did it under cover. Pleasure is identified with love. And when there is no pleasure in love, there is fear. So fear, pleasure go together. They are two sides of the same coin. So you have to go and ask yourself, what is this strange thing which man, throughout the ages, sought after, suffered for it, called it chastity, denied all the pleasures, all the sensitivities, all tastes, and gone off into a monastery. And labeled himself as being chaste. So we have to go into the question of what is chastity? A mind that evokes pictures of pleasure, sexual or otherwise, is an unchaste mind. Not the act of, but the pictures, the imaginations, the fancy, the demands, the constant repetition. Such a mind is an unchaste mind. And is a mind that is pursuing pleasure and is avoiding fear. Can it come upon love? And an ambitious man, can he love? You are ambitious, aren't you? All of you, in one way or another. When you follow somebody, your guru, your teacher, you're ambitious. You want to gain what he has or what he thinks he has. You know, the man who says he knows heaven, he does not know heaven. So you're ambitious, greedy, violent. And can that man know what love is? Answer it yourself. Can a man who is competitive, who is always comparing himself with another, physically, psychologically, intellectually, and so on, can he know what love means? And yet he talks about love. I love my family. I'm responsible because I love my wife and my children. Is that love? In relationship between human beings. Is that love? Question it, sirs and ladies. Don't accept a thing, find out. Because relationship is one of the most important things in life. To be related to another. How you are related to another brings about a society, a culture. So you have to find out what this relationship means between two human beings. And is there love in that relationship? Or is it a matter of routine, sexual pleasure, or the frustration in sex? You know, all the battles that go on with this, in this mad, crazy world. So when you say I'm related, what are you related to? You're related, are you not, to the image that you have built about her and she has built about you. The relationship is between these two images, which is verbal, which is memory, which is knowledge, which is the past. So is love, memory, so love is none of these things. And can you, as a human being, put aside your ambitions, your images about others, your conclusions, and be simple, clear. And then you will know what love is. Therefore, compassion. You talk a great deal about love. You kill animals for your food. Whales are disappearing. The earth is being destroyed for your pleasure. So, you have to understand this whole structure of thought which has produced human beings that have no love, though they may talk everlastingly about it, who have no compassion. Compassion means passion for all human beings, for all living things. They have no love between themselves, between wife and a husband and girl and a boy. They are just living on images, memories, past and the future memory projected from the past. Though they may talk about love, they are ambitious, greedy, violent, selfish. Can you, as a human being, put aside all this easily, quietly, without great demonstration of your sacrifice? And perhaps you will come upon that extraordinary thing without which life has no meaning. Tomorrow and the other, we've got 2 more meetings. Tomorrow we'll talk about suffering and the enormous problem of death. And also, what is meditation? Because we are concerned with the whole of life, not with one segment of life, one part, with the whole of it. The whole of it is death, relationship, fear, action, and the mind can come upon that which is eternal. All that is the whole of life, from the beginning to the end. Therefore, we must, if one is at all given to earnestness, one must inquire into all these matters. Do you want to ask any questions, or is that enough for this morning? You remember there is a lovely story of a preacher. Every morning he talked to his disciples. A sermon. And one day, as he was getting on the rostrum and about to speak, a bird sat on the windowsill and began to sing. It was a lovely morning, clear, soft air, and everything was rejoicing. And the bird sang its song and flew away. And the preacher said, "The sermon for this morning is over." Do you want to ask any questions after that?
speak, and I believe if I could truly understand, I could vivid. I listened to you, and I believe if I could fully understand what you were explaining to us, I could live a much better life. But still, I find this gap between what I can do, and I don't know what to do about it.
I understand. You've heard the question, so I won't repeat it. When we say we understand, what do we mean by that word? Is it an intellectual understanding? A verbal understanding? The grasp of the meaning of words which signify what one wants? Is that understanding at all? Or is understanding something which is not a mental process, a verbal dissertation, a verbal examination? For the word is not the thing. If you say, I understand, I've got what you mean, then you must examine, look into this. I've understood. May mean you have really understood verbally, which is no understanding at all. So understanding implies instant action, not understand verbally and later on act. There is no division between understanding and action. Good Lord, are all of you going to ask questions?
If worldly life is outward worldly life is reflection of inward spiritual life, then proceeding from the outward inward, material poverty is a reflection of spiritual poverty, and material well-being is a reflection of spiritual well-being. Can you comment on this?
What is the question, sir?
I'm curious about the fact that the developed countries are so well off.
I understand. I've got it.
Okay.
I've got it.
And this energy
Quite.
has to
Quite.
come from somewhere.
I understand.
Okay, thank you.
It is the responsibility of all governments, isn't it, to see that man, whether in America, Europe, or India, or Asia, to see that man has food, clothes, and shelter. It is necessary. Those are absolute necessary. Now, science says you can have that. Every man can have food, clothes, and shelter. Why is it not possible? What is preventing this? Which means well-being of man, physical well-being. What is preventing this? The communists say, follow my system. I've got a system, the communist says, that will solve the problem. Dictatorship of ideas. Dictatorship of some, by the few controlling the many. And the socialist has his own system. So has the capitalist. And the world is divided into nationalities. with their national prestige, with their sovereign governments and armies, and so on, so on. This division of ideas, ideals, systems, nationalities is preventing the unity of man deeply. Until you solve that problem, because we have discussed this with politicians, with economists, with others, they can't go beyond their specialization. We are human beings to live on this earth, all of us happily. It's our earth, not the communist world earth. Nobody's possessed this earth, it's ours. And we are destroying it because we are divided amongst ourselves. The rich and the poor, the intellectual, the architect, and so on, so on. So until that takes place, which means you must be free of this division. And then only we can have a system that will be happily accepted by all. That's enough, so I can't go deeply into it.
When you observe yourself, do you see a meaning in or behind your life? When you observe yourself, do you see a meaning in or behind your life?
Move a little bit from the microphone, so I can't quite hear.
When you observe yourself, do you see a meaning in or behind your life?
When you observe yourself, do you feel what's up?
Do you see a meaning? Meaning?
Meaning? I don't quite get it.
Purpose.
Purpose, meaning,
Purpose. Huh? Surface. Purpose.
Yes. When you observe yourself, do you see one in existence?
Do I have a purpose?
Yeah.
You are asking?
Yes.
It's very simple, sir. Do you have a purpose? The speaker. Do I have a goal? I'm afraid I haven't. Isn't that enough? Do you want all of you ask questions? Avanti. I mean, go ahead.
Okay, you make it sound so simple to be free, but in this society, how can we be free from anxieties, fear?
I pointed out, madam, first I pointed out the nature of fear, and to look at it, be aware of it, choicelessly, without resisting, without accepting, just look at it.
To be competitive because
That's what you are educated to be competitive. All your social structure is based on that. Therefore, somebody must start the other thing going. That's enough. Bas, isn't that enough, sir? All right. Go on, sir.
Thank you. This is almost as good as talking in person. If I am to share with you a question that concerns me, I'll have to communicate with you first, if I may, briefly.
What's that?
If I am to share with you a question which I have on my mind,
Please go ahead with your questions.
I will have to communicate with you first. You'll have to understand what I'm talking about before you'll understand what concerns me. Can I share that with you briefly, please?
Yes, please, whatever you want to say, I'm preventing you.
I personally see that our way of life, which you have spoken about, as being a sick, corrupt, and monstrous way of life, is virtually the way of life for the entire world, by way of our satellites and our computers and so on. And it seems to me that this corrupt and monstrous and poisonous way of life, of which the earth, the air, and the water bespeak of in their poison and in their corruption.
Sir, would you kindly make your question brief, because there are 2 or 3 others waiting. So what is your question, sir?
Well, it's a question that concerns me, and I can't just. You would not understand my question if you did not understand me.
Your question is you, isn't it?
He has something he wants to say. Jiminy crickets.
We talk about our sick way of life.
Yes.
My father, when he heard you speak 40 years ago, respected you very much because of your ability to cut through the heart of affairs to the underlying germs. But I'm disappointed because I don't hear anyone addressing what I regard as the germs to our sick way of life. I see that our sick way of life is on a throne. It is a throne, and the throne is perched on circumstances which we're blind to.
So, sir, you have to do something about it, haven't you?
Well, I'm trying to share with you my question about this matter. That's why I'm at this microphone.
What is the question, sir?
The question is to be understood by you if you're going to answer it as I intended, as I asked it. Well, if you'll allow me, I'll give what is you have acknowledged in your talks that our roots are in European and Asiatic traditions, and I see that our roots are in this part of the world. And you have acknowledged the Greeks, how they tend to measure things.
Yes, sir, but what is the question, sir? Forgive me.
Well, if you'll forgive me, I'll make it clear to you. Because if I don't make it clear to you, then I won't be addressing you, and it'll just be wasting my breath too. But our roots are in Europe and Asia, as you've acknowledged, I think, by and large. But what is it about European and Asiatic life? What is it about European and Asiatic life, which this way of life is an outgrowth of, in a germinal sense?
Sir, you have not understood what I said. I said India and here, the human beings are the same. They go through tortures, anxieties, fears, traditions, all that. We human beings are similar.
What is the germ of their way of life, which is as corrupt and as sick and as decadent as ours is? And we're not talking about the world. Our predecessors of the other 4 main continents of the world, Africa, North and South America, and Australia, had a different stream of life, and they were not making deserts out of the country. They weren't polluting the earth, the air, and the water like we are, and like the Europeans and Asiatics have. I think there's a germ fundamental to us that we inherited by virtue of our roots being in Europe and Asia, which is not being addressed, and I'm inquiring you of your views on.
Therefore, we must change. Change ourselves into what I've been talking about.
What about the germs? What is the germs of our sickness?
What is
So I'm talking about germs of sickness. Germs of our sickness.
If you have got germs that is making you sick, take some kind of medicine. Homeopathic, allopathic, and there are different kinds of remedies. So this is not what we are talking about, for God's sake. Please, give the other fellow his chance, sir.
Would you allow me to make myself clear?
Vacate the microphone!
that's enough, sir. Please, he won't.
Thank you for I'm sorry that you couldn't understand my question.
Please, release past time, please.
You said in the very beginning, if anyone didn't understand or didn't follow what you were saying, we should speak up. Well, I didn't quite understand exactly what you were trying to get across about thought and conflict. And as a result of that, I have some questions that might be irrelevant.
What are you talking about? The questioner says. I don't understand what you mean, the process of thought.
That's what I didn't understand.
That's what he didn't understand. Must I go into it all again?
Okay. Granted, or let's accept the assumption
it is not okay, sir.
That the understanding is not that there's not that big a void between it, and then I'll ask my question. All I'd like to know is, how does one divorce himself from thought? I mean, how does one divorce himself from thought?
How does one free from thought? How does one control thought? How does one understand what place has thought? Thought, as I've explained, has its place. When you go from here to your house, you know where it is. The memory tells you where it is, and you go there. So, technologically, in skill and other ways, thought, memory, experience is necessary. Right, sir?
That's what I was going to say. I felt that it seems to me that we've advanced to such a point in our society, or wherever, that it is necessary, that the only thing that we have, the only bank that we have,
of course, is thought.
And like, even an observation, a beautiful observation like the mountain or the sky.
I understand, sir. That's what we say. Thought cannot change psychologically man. So one has to go into find out for oneself what place has thought. Because thought must be used. When I speak English, I'm using the words which I've learned, memory, and so on.
Mr. Murray, I know that you're really pressed for time, and I feel just terrible asking you.
All right, sir, I'm sorry. I have to stop if you don't mind.